A few years ago, I bought a tank that just might be the absolute worst Space Marine tank there is. Now, not in terms of appearance. I actually think it looks really cool, and that's why I'm gonna build and paint it today. But yeah, we're gonna go on the journey of finding out just why this tank is so terrible and make a beautiful model for my shelf. I don't know, I'm never gonna use it, it sucks. It's tabletop time. So the tank that I've been alluding to today is the Legion Aquator with spicular rockets. And this tank came out in resin at the very end of Horus Heresy First Edition, and I just adored the look of it. It's like this heavy artillery that's unique for Space Marines, really cool, so I had to pick one up, only to later realize what you're seeing in front of you. It's unplayably bad. Let's focus on that later. For now, what we're gonna do is actually make a project out of this. I'm gonna build this kit, but I'm also gonna do some customization and also see if my untested metallic Alpha Legion paint scheme can actually work on a vehicle. But now you've seen what I'm gonna be working on, I think it's time we talk about the video that came out last week.
Last week, we released a video that was a bit awkward to make, but also really honest in basically what's happening here.
The response has been absolutely amazing from you guys. We appreciate every single person that watched that video and left a comment below. The amount of support has been very overwhelming.
Yeah, reading those comments and replying to most of them, I saw a lot of what we felt was kind of proven true. A lot of people's stories with the dreaded algorithm all seem to reflect what we'd been talking about internally. So that was kind of reassuring to see. And as well, it goes without saying, the monumental amount of support that's come through on our Patreon has been absolutely amazing. With that support, we are that big step closer to being sustainable. We're not there yet, but things look a little bit more optimistic right now. You are all out there basically allowing us to hopefully survive long enough to put other measures in place, create some cool new Kickstarters and products, and the things we've been dreaming of doing. So we can't thank you enough for that.
Yeah, you are actually keeping the light on here.
Literally. There's 6 lights on. We're really optimistic that our Saturday videos are going to be better than ever, and we're just going to do our best to basically keep making you guys proud. Are you proud, Dad? Daddy! So, the way this works for those who haven't been in the game for that long is Forge World, aka resin kits. They're kind of very expensive, more difficult to work with, and they require a bit of prep. Now, it's really important to do this. You need to wash all of the resin parts because sometimes a release agent can be left on the resin, and if this happens, basically paint, even your undercoats or your spray coats, won't adhere to it properly. And when you're doing layers later, it's kind of like an oil and water situation, just doesn't mix, and it's really annoying to try and fix later. So it's important to get some hot soapy water like I've done here and just scrub all of the parts and then leave them to dry. And that's really your first step. Now, as I bought this kit secondhand, I'm not actually entirely sure if it's been cleaned or not. So I'm just going to do it anyway. I do note a few bits have been assembled and magnetized, but broadly, the kit seems mostly simple. It's definitely one of the later kits that they did where most of the parts are like solid pieces. This looks like it's had one bit glued onto it, but beyond that, it's a single casting. And those later Forge World resins are actually getting pretty good. So I don't think I'll be having too much trouble with this one. With the tank parts all cleaned up and dry, I now need to glue it together. And when you're trying to glue rather large chunks of resin together, it can be worth not using super glue. And in fact, using a 2-part epoxy. So I'm gonna do that. So yeah, I'm gonna go get set up and I'm gonna epoxy this giant resin tank together because after that gets to dry overnight, that should be fairly strong. And I shouldn't have to worry about it falling apart in the 0 games it's gonna get used in. Okay, it is the next morning. It's time to see if the epoxy approach worked or if it's all gonna fall apart and be terrible. Okay, moment of truth. I mean, I know it's gonna work. It's 2-part epoxy. Ta-da! Beautiful. Now, I am Games Workshop's absolute worst kind of heresy player because I paint my Alpha Legion and build my Alpha Legion to be late heresy, a little bit corrupt, and then I do my 40k Alpha Legion to be Alpha Legion, so a lot less chaosy. Basically, the reason for this is I kind of have this continuity between the armies, but I like to be able to use some units across both. So if I do like a Demeus Predator, put a little bit of chaosy stuff on it, but really subtle so it fits in the late heresy, but then it also kind of works as like a a non-chaosy Alpha Legion 41st Millennium tank that they've kept, in the warp or whatever for that long. So I'm going to do the same with this, even though the Aquator can't actually be fielded in 40k. I think it will just fit with my army better. So that means doing a little bit of customization and conversion, putting a little bit of chaos trim on it, but subtly. So yeah, let's dive in. So there you go, that's my little chaos trim done and the first step to how I might do some modifications. I have another idea, but I'm gonna hold on to that for a bit later in the video. I'm really happy with how my makeshift sprue glue worked out. I whipped some of that up just to fill some gaps, and also how the rivets I use from an old train company, Tichy Train Group. I love those rivets, so easy and they're consistent. So together they've made some great looking trim. And once I get some paint on it, I can start to talk to you about why this tank is so bad. It's so bad. I mean, I don't think I'm ever gonna use this. I don't think I can. It's bad. This is like a back to basics video. So if you're using undercoat, like spray undercoat, try and keep it like 30 centimeters away from the model and do short bursts starting off the model and ending off the model. It's a really good way to make sure you get a consistent coat. And if there's areas you don't get, let it dry. Don't just blitz it on. That's how you get terrible finishes. It's really just a matter of consistency and taking your time with it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this tank, but I thought I'd run through the paint scheme first. So I'm going to be painting it in my new Alpha Legion scheme. This is for my Alpha Legion called Task Force Katos. They're a detached unit of Alpha Legion that were assigned to defend a sector, and they have really close ties with the Dark Mechanicum. During the Horus Heresy, they stayed fairly detached from the war, maintaining a lot of deep cover operations, and they continued to survive into Warhammer 40k. So I actually can do 40k and 30k models in the same paint scheme with some minor alterations. The paint scheme is a bit of an homage to Legion, the first book that really showcased the Alpha Legion, in which they have indigo armor, and I really like that vibe of including the purples, so I've decided to go for a more purpley Alpha Legion. I then use metallics from scale 75 to dry brush over the top of that purple and to establish that shiny, scaly Alpha Legion color and bring in those green tones we're familiar with for the Alphas. As another nod to the Alpha Legion and to Omegon, I use a lot of blacks on the vehicle, and then I just accent them with some nice brasses and silver trim. As a final touch reminiscent of Legion, once again, I paint their weapon casings in this really bright and poppy purple. It's a matte purple, not a metallic, and it's reminiscent of the rifles, the gun casings that the Alpha Legion are holding on that front cover artwork. So now you know what I'll be painting. I want to talk about the tank while I paint it. So the Legion Aquator is a Forge World exclusive, and it's also a Horus Heresy exclusive. And I think because of this, it might be one of the rarest tanks you'll ever see on the table. I have personally never seen anyone else with this tank, and that could be for a number of reasons. Number one, it's expensive. Number two, it's a fairly new model and it came out at the very end of Horus Heresy 1.0. And number three, it's awful. I mean, I alluded to this at the start of the video. I mean, the thumbnail and title, you know what this video is about. This is, in my opinion, the very worst tank in the entirety of the Horus Heresy. Vehicles already have a lot going against them in the Horus Heresy, and the Aquator just combines all the worst elements into one vehicle. And let's break it down. So to give you a bit of context behind the rules they decided to make, I thought I'd tell you what it is. Supposedly, the Aquator pattern is a heavy artillery platform that's designed to serve at the front line, that packs all the weapons needed to break down fortifications. They lumber along supporting infantry with their weapons, their side profile weapons like these autocannons, firing away as they basically get into position at short range and obliterate anything that's needed. There's even a line that says the Space Marines of any infantry force take heart from the sight of an Aquator squadron, knowing the hulking artillery pieces will see them through the most ferocious firefights without pause. Now, here's the big problem with all of this. These things are made of paper. This massive tank has armor value of 12, which for those who aren't familiar with Horus Heresy vehicles had an armor value that determines what weapons can damage them and penetrate them. And anything that can overwhelm that armor value has a chance of literally one-shot killing the vehicle, no matter how many points it has. Armor value 12 is very low. It is reserved for light vehicles and support vehicles, and the armor values can go from 10 all the way up to 14. Having armor value 12 puts your vehicle in dangerously close territory where most standard anti-tank weapons are wounding it on a 3. This means a handful of las cannons are going to rip through an Aquator in a second. Now, it's supposedly compensated for by having a few more hull points than the regular vehicle with hull points 5, but that only really helps if light weapons are glancing it rather than heavy weapons penetrating it, which is a big problem. Okay, so I've been painting this and I keep looking at it and thinking it's not quite Alpha Legion-y enough. And you know, I mentioned something secret I wanted to work on, and that's sculpting. If you haven't watched the channel before, I am kind of like an amateur 3D sculptor. I've made some bits that people have used before, like the Sakura Tau, and I like to make parts for my models. So I'm gonna make an Alpha Legion logo Task Force Katos. So Task Force Katos have a real nautical theme running through them. So the main thing here is I wanna try and design a logo that also kind of looks a bit like a squid or a kraken from a distance. So to do that, I use the Alpha and the Omega becoming like the fins on the top of the squid's body. And then I also include a half cog because of the Dark Mechanicus allegiance my task force has. Then I add a bunch of chains, which are a common Alpha Legion motif, and some crazy long mechadendrites, and altogether, I think I made a pretty good approximation of a squid. Let's print it and see how it goes. Now, I can't believe how amazingly they've turned out, but the killer is going to be actually trying to get them off the print bed. So I'm going to use a razor blade and hopefully it comes off, but I'm not expecting much. We'll see. I can't believe I actually got them off the print bed without them breaking, and I've cured them up. Don't worry, I'm touching them without gloves. They turn out amazing. I can't wait to get them on the tank, so I'm just going to go do it. But I think I'm going to use the bigger ones. The little ones are not impressive enough. The second problem with this vehicle is its primary weapon profile. It has one of the largest blast templates, area of effect weapons in all of Horus Heresy with a 7-inch blast. Certainly for its size, that's pretty good. The weapons profile is actually not that impressive for a vehicle that costs as much as it does. This bad boy with a spicular rocket system will rock 215 points, which is almost double that of a Whirlwind. The weapon profile is strength 7, so it's not going to be instant killing any Space Marines, and it's also AP 4, so it's not ignoring Space Marine armor. And let's be honest, 80% of the armies on the table are Space Marines. A 7-inch blast is pretty tasty, but when we've got Whirlwinds at half the price, firing a better profiled weapon with a 5-inch blast instead of a 7-inch, you can see immediately that you're not actually gaining that much more for a huge number of points. The one thing it has going for it is rending, which means on a 6-up, you will ignore armor saves, which is really cool. But without being strength 8, you're not doubling out veterans, you're not killing Terminators, you're going to be plinking wounds off things. But what kills it is this tank has limited ammunition. That means every time you fire it, you roll a dice. If you roll a 6, you can never fire it again. So that's cool. That's great on my ridiculously expensive tank. And there's one more thing. The vehicle does, as a saving grace, have the Bombard unit type, which basically means if it moves half speed, it can shoot its sponson weapons, even if it fires its ordnance weapon. That's good. Why you would want to actually advance this armor 12 thing up the board is beyond me, though. All its guns have plenty of range, and yeah, there's no real advantage conferred by doing this, but I guess it's nice to know it can do what it does in the description, provided your enemies have absolutely no anti-tank weapons whatsoever. It should be fine. Now, as I said, let's take a look at this next to a Predator. Now, keep in mind this Predator costs 80 points less and has armor 13 on the front. So it actually has more armor than the Aquator. So here we have my Predator next to the Aquator, and as you've just seen, the scale is hilarious. The Predator is so much smaller than the Aquator. You can actually see the width of the armor, which is kind of important when you're thinking about like the visual language of a model and whether or not that model looks like it performs the job it's supposed to on the tabletop. There is no one that can convince me that this Predator looks like it has more armor. The Aquator, the side panels are like double the thickness of the Predator, and you can't really convince me that that's what hull points do, like the HP of the vehicle. To me, hull points reflect like how much a vehicle can shrug off damage, which is partly how big it is, which the Aquator definitely is big enough for me to say, hey, 5 hull points, that seems accurate. But armor is another piece of the puzzle, and you can have a really big vehicle with lots of hull points that looks unarmored and looks like it shouldn't have much armor, but Aquator ain't it. The side panels are roughly double the width of the Predator. This thing's got 12 armor on the front, 12 on the sides, and 10 on the back. The Predator is 13 on the front. And that 13 will really be the difference in making the Aquator survive from light weapons. It would put it a lot further out of range of autocannons and things like that. So I hope that illustrates the point of, I guess, one of my problems with the Aquator. Visual language is super important in a war game, at least to me. So I think we need to make some changes. And I've got some ideas for what we could do to improve the rules, which that's an interesting one, because Horus Heresy doesn't really change the rules. And they've kind of done something that's cool in they released an edition and haven't been endlessly updating it, which is kind of nice for a change. But at the same time, there's a few glaring issues, a few unbalanced units that really could use a patch. And I'd love to see a patch, but I don't want a new rulebook that I have to buy. It's a catch-22, isn't it? So for those who aren't that interested in the nitty-gritty of rules, I'm sorry, I got a bit deep there, but hey, I'm passionate about cool units and I really want this to work. I honestly think if you want to keep this vehicle as expensive as it is and keep the gun as bad as it is, it needs to be as resilient as it looks like it is. So I'm talking 14 front armor, 13 on the sides. Vehicles aren't that like resilient, it's fine. 12 armor is unacceptable. It just means it'll never survive. So it just doesn't perform its job of being resilient and firing a mediocre gun. The other way to deal with it would be to keep it being fragile, although I don't like that because it's a cognitive dissonance with how the vehicle actually looks. And if you went down that route, you'd really need to give the gun a little bit more teeth. Get rid of the limited weapon thing. Variants like that just isn't fun. Like no one enjoys firing their 200-point thing once, scattering, and then they can never fire it again because they roll a 6. It's just not fun game mechanics. And I honestly think you could improve this weapon a little bit. I think you could bump the strength to 8 so that when you do get those lucky hits through more expensive units, you actually kill them. That would make this a bit more of a threat. Pick one. Or third option, just make it way cheaper. Drop it like 60 points and it might be okay. Yeah, they're just my ideas for how we can fix it. Anyway, yes, I've talked so much about the grit of tanks because I care. I really like Horus Heresy and I'd love to see this tank get the glow up it deserves. But hopefully you've enjoyed me painting it. So it's come for the time in the video where we do reveals and you get to see the cool tank that I've been working on. But just this once, I wanted to stop everyone just before then to say a massive thank you to all of the new people that have signed up to our Patreon. Now this video was mid-production when our last one went out and we got that huge influx of love. If you join our Patreon, you get a verbal shout out in a video. We're gonna start doing that from the next episode going forward. We've got quite a few names to go through. And I really wanted the whole team to be here to be able to do that. Now, while we get back on our feet, it is more important than ever to think about supporting our Patreon. If you are supporting it, you are now helping keep the lights on. And it is really because of you that we will be able to keep doing this. This support means a lot and it is going somewhere helpful and we are getting closer. We're getting closer to being in a place where while we won't be going back to full-time hours anytime soon, we can at least keep doing this, making a video a week and not going anywhere. So we really appreciate the support thus far. And if you'd love to sign up, we do a weekly behind the scenes vlog where I do an off the cuff update for everyone around the studio, as well as we have our monthly mini review and a Discord that is now full of so many more wonderful people. It was wonderful before, but now there's even more people in there. It's a really great place. That's a private Discord where we can hang out and chat. If you want to support us, please go check it out. Links are in the description. But now I've held you too long. Let's go look at that tank. This has been really fun and it's great to see my Alpha Legion paint scheme actually works on vehicles. I wasn't sure if it would with all the metallic dry brushes. I'm really happy with how it turned out, the little custom icons. There are a few things I could change to improve them. I think they worked well. Let me know what you think and if you'd like to see more of Task Force Katos and their vehicles, more weird esoteric stuff from the Horus Heresy or 40K, because you know, that's my wheelhouse. That's what I really enjoy doing. And also I couldn't finish the video without saying another absolutely massive thanks to everyone. It really really means a huge amount. Your support, your joining our Patreon and uplifting that has not only been amazing just to see all of that in the community, but it actually gives us hope that we might be able to keep doing this. And with your support, we'll be able to keep making videos for a long time. So we're not there yet. The goal is lofty, but with your help, we might be able to get there. So thank you so much again. And yeah, tune in next week for another video. Jen is working on some very cool stuff, some retro stuff.